3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. My name is Chris Lee. I am the founder of the Black Bunker and also the CEO for Chris Lee G Consulting, and of course, the co-host of the Government Coins podcast.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shakia. I'm the founder of GovLEA, and we are a supplier diversity management firm. And I'm actually another co-host of Government Coins. So super excited to have this episode done today. Who would have thought, like when we started this, we would be speaking directly with small business specialists at federal agencies and really bringing them directly to the table to have these conversations, and especially having conversations with organizations that we don't necessarily think about as often. And that's what today is about. So having a conversation with Mr. Richard Mann at NASA. So, Chris Lee, would you like to share how we got to this interview before we go ahead and have Richard to introduce himself?
Yeah, I think when everyone thinks of NASA, we kind of only think space, right? And for, communities that could be minority women-owned business enterprises, we don't necessarily think that we can tap into space. And so NASA has done a phenomenal job when it comes down to working with small businesses. And January of 2021, they put out market research for human capital. And for me, being a human capital specialist, I've put in and, responded to their RFI, and they've been so responsive, having events, being present in the conversation with small businesses. And immediately I had a conversation with one of their other small business specialists at a specific location. And I said, hey, can you come on the podcast, right? Like, more businesses that look like myself want to know how we can do business with NASA. And of course, they were like, yeah, we can definitely, we'll put you in contact. And of course, Richard was able to join us. So Richard, please introduce yourself, your position at NASA. Tell us about yourself, your growth. How did you get to this point?
How did I get to this point? Well, thank you for having me. So a lot of people in my field start off in the contracting field. So they're contracting officers, contract specialists, and they learn the procurement world that way in the regulatory environment. And so that's kind of how I got into this world. My first taste of it was actually as a cost analyst at Avondale Shipyard, in New Orleans area, which is gone now pretty much. And then from that, I became contracting specialist, contract officer for Defense Logistics Agency in Virginia, and U.S. Agency for International Development in D.C. And then in 2003, I went to NASA Stennis Space Center, which is in Mississippi. And I was a contracting officer there. And there I kind of lateraled into the small business role. And I was wearing some other hats as well. So I was at Stennis Space Center 2003 to 09, and then 09 became full-time small business program manager at NASA headquarters back up in D.C. And so that's kind of my career path. So
wow, so from DLA to NASA
USAID, yeah, but in the federal government world, that's not unusual to bounce around agencies a little bit. So I was like 4 years, and then I've been with NASA since 2003. So been with NASA a while now.
Wow. And then also, would you tell us a little bit about the Office of Small Business at NASA?
Sure. NASA is decentralized, which is when we go around, we talk about how to do business with us. That's one of my key themes is that, we have these centers, they're field offices, but we call them centers. And that's where the contracting happens. That's where the contracting decisions are made. So accordingly, we have the agency small business office where I am, and then we have small business personnel at covering each one of our centers or buying offices, however you want to call it. And so in my role now, the center people will do a little bit more of the outreach stuff than we will. We'll do some of it to keep our toes in the water, so to speak. But I'm kind of in charge of the goaling for the agency and the metrics and for the centers. I kind of oversee the subcontracting processes, which is another big deal to us. and then some policy stuff, keeping up with the changes in the legal and the regulatory environment, and maybe updating our own local internal policies, when it's necessary. So that's about as it's I say, if somebody tells somebody I work for NASA and they get all excited, and I say, no, I'm not a rocket scientist, it's more on the business end of things, but I still like, working for NASA and what we do. So my heart's in it in that respect.
No, this is great. Honestly, Richard, I think it's great that you said that, like, you're not a rocket scientist, because we kind of limit ourselves and think, well, if it's NASA, then I need to be able to build a spaceship, right? And it's like, no, there are other factors.
There's a simple way to think about it is, in last fiscal year 21, we obligated about $19 billion total on contracts. And one of your questions that might come up later is about what our top needs are. And of that 19 billion, roughly 70 to 75% is what you might call space stuff. Okay, it's research and development, manufacturing, the hardware, the spacecraft, the rockets, the engineering, that type of thing. And then the rest of it, so you're looking at about 25, 30% would be more what you might call the everyday government stuff. And that would be, security guards on base, construction, facilities maintenance, some IT stuff, the human resources stuff that you referred to earlier. So, 25, 30% of 19 billion is still, 5 billion, 6 billion, something like that. So yeah, there's, there is that piece of it, so, and we work with both sides, the space stuff and the mission, as we call it, mission support stuff. So.
Absolutely. I think so. One of our co-hosts just joined. We want him to be able to introduce himself. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Hamza Sabri, CEO, founder of Global Connects, and one of the amazing co-hosts for Government Coins. And I'm late.
It's all good. You showed up.
Oh, good. Yeah, you made that.
Actually, we're done already. We covered everything. So,
Okay, no, we're good. We're good. You know what? And this is great that you joined us. We'll jump right into it. So just to give you, Richard, a little bit of insight, right? Our goal is to really demystify this idea of doing business with the government. And for communities that are, predominantly minority or women-owned business enterprises, they really want to know, how does NASA really focus on or create programs or, any groups or opportunities for underrepresented groups, right? So what are some of the things that NASA is doing, and how can a small business join some of your programs?
Okay, so the underrepresented factor is an initiative of the current administration. And so we're getting, the memos from OMB, Office of Management, and this applies to every agency, it's not just us. So, we kind of have to answer that mail, and the plans are for that are in progress now. So they're still kind of being developed internally. One thing, as you may know, is that the small disadvantaged business goal was raised from 5.5% to 8.2%. Now, I will say that, an increase in the goal doesn't automatically or immediately necessarily translate to increase in dollars or number of businesses. The goal change was done almost 1 quarter into the fiscal year. And so, and plus, other than purchase orders and simplified acquisitions, the bigger contracts take a year or two to award. Okay, so for us to turn that around, you might see an improvement eventually, but for us to turn that around in a matter of months is probably a stretch a little bit. And then we're under this continuing resolution environment. The Congress never passes a budget for a full year. The current resolution expires tomorrow. Okay, will they extend it? Probably, but there's a chance we could be shut down tomorrow. All right. The House has passed it. The Senate has, last I've heard, hasn't passed it yet. So we'll see. And if they do pass this next extension, it only goes till March. And then, so it's sort of hard to plan your spending when, you're operating in that sort of environment. Okay. That being said, The one tool that we have to definitely increase small disadvantaged business spending is the 8A program. So, we are looking at that in terms of, instead of doing a regular small business set aside, for example, putting stuff in the 8A program, or for example, the women owned, small business program, which I think, if I remember correctly, the human capital one is going to women owned small business set aside. Okay.
So after we did the market research, they then came back and said the RFP can only be for women-owned small business.
Yeah. So, but that whole process will take a year and a half, and then if things get protested, so that's a good example of why, you'll see the results eventually, but it's going to take a little bit. So.
That was just before we pass on that aspect of it, one component that you added was the bigger contracts take a longer time to award. But then also with your role in managing the subcontractor, so prime and subcontractor relationships, usually how does a business find out if there's a prime who has a subcontractor program in place with NASA? And then also, how is the process of just ensuring that primes are allocating opportunities for subs?
Right. So we publish on our website, and this is where I'm going to start. Now, if I put stuff in the chat, will that show up on the YouTube screen?
If you put it in the chat, I'll grab it and put it into it.
All right. So I'm going to start posting some things in the chat, and this will just be like website links. And because we do have some information there, I hate to, just say go website. There are some things that we publish on there. One is our top 20 primes list, okay, which we update every year. Most of them are aerospace firms. It's the usual. The top one is called California Institute of Technology, or Caltech, and they run our Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. They're our top contractor in terms of how much money they get from us every year. And they're our top contractor in terms of how much they subcontract out, actually. Okay. So, and then, Boeing and Lockheed are the next two pretty much every year. Northrop Grumman's on there. A couple that are not necessarily aerospace companies are SAIC, which is, and mostly an IT firm. And then Jacobs Technology, which does a lot of our facilities work. But anyway, there's the link to our website, and some of the top 20 lists, you've got to click on this button called More Stories, and it's got to do with the agency format for our websites. But anyway, that's our website, and so a lot of the stuff that I refer to will be on there. So so we have our top 20 primes list. That list has their websites. Okay, it doesn't have names or points of contact because some of those companies are so big they have multiple points of contact. It depends on what center. So then you got to go to my counterparts at the centers to get to the prime contractor points of contact. So it's a little bit of a labyrinth, and a lot of times it boils down to how many phone calls you want to make. So now, as far as your second part of your question, and over making sure that they subcontract out, they do have subcontracting plans with goals on them. And I spend a lot of time making sure that industry knows that we're paying attention to how they perform. So it's so, how they do is not really releasable because it's a performance evaluation thing. So it's like, you don't want your report card made public. So I can't really talk about individual companies like that, but I'm doing a training session for Goddard Space Flight Center on that Wednesday next week. It'll be virtual, and I'll probably do another one for another center in April. So, and I spend a lot of time making sure the contractors' reports are done, and that NASA personnel, review and accept or reject those reports.
Thank you for that, Richard. That was very insightful. And also having that top 20s list allows business owners like myself to be able to go in and check out these firms. Because even if it isn't a part of the contract that they are doing currently with NASA, there's opportunities for me to provide my services in some way, shape, or form, because we know they have the money at this point through the contract. So thank you for that, Richard.
And I
Right.
think
And so, like, a lot of the contracts, a lot of the, the everyday government stuff, those are 5-year contracts. So you might find an opportunity or a contract that fits what you do today, but you got to wait till it comes around again for the recompete. Okay. So chasing down government contracts is not an instant gratification endeavor at all. So you can take, it can take, a few years. And not only that, but you need that much time to get your proposal together anyway. RFP drops, it's on the street 30 days. Well, if you don't know about it by then, too late. You got to have your ducks in a row to get your proposal together ahead of time. And if it's a large proposal where you team, you got to get on, you got to get your teaming arrangement set up as well.
Absolutely.
I love that. I would say this, and Hamza will ask the next question, but I've talked about this many times. When it comes down to doing business with the government, you have to have an understanding that this isn't going to be, hey, here's the award tomorrow, but the investment of time that you put in and partnering will definitely pay off. That's how I got my first sub deal, which NASA has done a great job. They're providing you with the top list, right? Not every agency will do that for you. And so I pulled the physical list myself and had to call and cold call everyone on the list until I got my first subcontracting opportunity. And so I think it's great. And another thing is, a lot of people aren't invested in understanding the process, where it is essential that you respond to market research, because although the market research will not turn around and give you a reward, it definitely will help guide the conversation. And to be very honest, by the time the RFP hits the market, actually, Bruce was the first person to tell me that. Now, Brock, his name is Brock, right?
David, yeah,
Brock.
David.
He was like, if it hits the market, you're too late. Like they're far gone. So responding to the market research a year ago, and then everyone's like, oh, I want to get on this contract. I'm like, the relationships that have been built, the proposals that have been written. I mean, it's essential that you market research.
Now it's interesting that you told me that you were cold calling people. It seems to me that for y'all to network is much tougher in the virtual environment than if we were on site and you could, socialize a little bit, and network and build relationships that way. Is that would you find that to be true?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So what our hope is going forward, we did a few virtual events prior to the pandemic, but it's been all virtual since then. So what we found is that we've been doing more events virtually. I mean, because of the virtual environment, and we get a higher attendance. Okay. So, but because, part of the value of these events is the networking with each other. And so without that, our hope going forward is that our outreach program would be a blend of the two, some live events and some virtual. So we'll see, that'll depend on the environment, but we'll see how that goes.
So from your experience, what are the top 3 goods or services that's purchased from small businesses?
Okay, so that tends to be the same industries that we buy from all businesses, large or small. All right. Number one, and we look at this in terms of NAICS codes. If you're familiar, it's the North American Industrial Classification System. And so the number one NAICS code by far is R&D, research and development. Okay. True for, if you add, it's probably around 40–50% of our total 19 billion is R&D NAICS code. Right. Now, there are things buried in that. For example, our contract with Caltech for the Jet Propulsion Lab is an R&D NAICS code, but they run the whole lab. So there's all the, facilities, operation stuff buried within that. All right. The second one, I think, has changed a little bit, and that is an industry code, and it's going to sound kind of funny, but it's called non-scheduled chartered air freight transportation. All right. Non-scheduled chartered air freight transportation. Now, what that is basically First of all, it's SpaceX and Grumman taking supplies up to the space station and back. Now, those are large businesses, but it's also the second largest area for small businesses. And we have this program called CLIPS that's run out of Johnson Space Center in Houston. And that stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Services. So we have a lot of small businesses that are taking payloads to the moon for us, okay? Or at least they're under contract to. The orders have been issued. I don't know that the payloads have gone there yet, and that's in advance of returning astronauts to the moon. So that's the second largest industry we've got towards small businesses. The R&D, well, let's see, that was $3 billion went to small businesses at the prime level last year, and over half of that was for R&D. The next one was this CLIPS program, 270 million, and then the third one was just the general engineering NAICS code, which was about $250 million, 248 million. So those are the top three, at least for fiscal 21.
Okay.
Okay.
How much did you say for the general engineering, Richard? I missed that number.
It was 248 million that we obligated, and it could have been contracts awarded last year or contracts, there tend to be 5-year contracts. They could have been awarded, say 2017, for example, and we obligated money to it. So those are the top three for fiscal 21. And if you go below that, you're going to get into some IT, some IT stuff and facilities maintenance stuff if you go beyond that. So.
Wow. Okay. We had someone from the America Seed Fund on the episode 2, actually. And she came in and told us a little bit about the SBIR and STTR program. Does NASA run their own, or is NASA a part of that program, or do they have most of those research and development dollars come from that program?
So the SBIR program is run from a separate office from mine. It's run out of our Science Technology Mission Directorate. All right. They have their own webpage. Their solicitation's out on the street now. That comes out pretty much every January, closes in March. Their topics change every year. Some agencies use grants for their SBIR awards. We use contracts, which is good for us because we get the credit for it. And then the awards are generally made in the May or June timeframe. And for NASA, you're looking at about a total of $160 to $180 million per year in SBIR and STTR awards. If you give me a second, I'll go to that website and paste that in the chat here. And if you Google NASA SBIR, it'll come up. But I'll get the.
I have it actually, Richard. As you were talking, I try to go and grab the links as well. But that is really good. We were having a conversation around how these funds are usually set aside for those small businesses and just mostly innovative technology solutions. So that's why my question was geared around the research and development aspect of it, because most of it would be something new, innovative, and it's not technically a product that's already created. Am I right when I say that?
Yeah. So SBIR is innovative research. So it's technology that either they're working on and hasn't been developed yet, or it's developed and hasn't been brought to market yet. And so some of it we do use. Now, my favorite story from this, there was an SBIR contract from 2013. And you know what additive manufacturing is, the 3D printing, where, it's a make it, not take it. So you have a 3D printer on the space station or on a spacecraft, going long distance, astronauts on it. You can print certain things you need rather than loading up the spacecraft with extra weight. Okay. So what this particular SBIR contract did in 2013 was print food. And, it was a certain kind of protein that was the ink for the printer. And apparently they could print steaks and things like that. I don't know that you could do medium rare, order it like that. But so that's sort of a fledgling sub industry. I haven't heard much about that lately, but that was one concept. If you're going to go to Mars, it's at least a 6-month trip out. And so that's a way to, keep the astronauts fed for that, amount of time. So that's one of my favorite SBIR stories. Like I said, it's $180 million a year for SBIR and STTR, which is about 1/10 of the 1.7 billion that went to small businesses in R&D overall. So SBIR is an important component, but there's a lot more R&D that is just, straight NASA requirements. So
that's that. I mean, 3D printing food, now that's innovation.
That was 9 years ago. So when it first came out. So
Did you try the steaks, Richard?
I've not had access to that. So no, I have not tried it.
Oh, you say you didn't have access to it?
Yeah, gotcha. I wanted to know what is, and I know we're going to ask a little bit about challenges, but this is my last question for this part is, is NASA doing anything with historically Black colleges and universities? A lot of what we try to push is bringing the government to the community. So what does that look like for NASA and historically Black colleges?
All right, so we put a lot of effort into that. It's not easy. There's no authority to set aside for universities. Universities are not generally legally considered to be small businesses because they're not businesses. They have to be organized for profit. So universities have to compete against the world for contracts, okay? So we try to emphasize the subcontracting side of things for universities. There's different components to it. One is the STTR program, right? Where you have a university as a subcontractor basically to the prime. And you have just general subcontracting. JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, that's Caltech again, they subcontract out to a lot of universities just for research and development. That's what universities do, use research and development. And then you have, and this was, I think we were going to talk about this later, the broad agency announcements. And that's where a lot of universities get prime contracts because it's a different process than the FAR Part 15 RFP deal. Those are either broad agency announcements or NASA research announcements. And I'm going to type in the chat where they are posted. And we have a website called Inspires. And that's where those are posted. And so that's, I think, the angle that we need to hit as far as MSIs and HBCUs are concerned is that website. Currently, we really only have one contract with an HBCU, which is Hampton University, and it's from a broad agency announcement contract they got in 2003 that's still going. So I don't have access to whether we're not getting proposals from them or not, but that's what I feel is our best avenue as far as increasing our participation. So, but we have a STEM office, and there's a division within the STEM office called MUREP, M-U-R-E-P, which is a minority university research education project, I think. And we participate with them in most of their events, and there's one next week that involves the CIA, which is the one of the athletic conferences, and they put on one of their outreach events. Now, and then we have a technology infusion road tour that's planned as a hybrid event in Chicago in June. And so, every time we've tried to schedule a hybrid or a live one so far, it's reverted to virtual. So we'll see about this one in June. So, it's not easy, especially when universities are set up, more on the grant side, which we don't, small businesses, all contracts, not grants, but we do put a lot of effort into it.
Oh, what are some of the set aside goals for NASA?
Yeah, so every agency has goals, and the small business goal overall is 23% for the government, but SBA negotiates that. So every agency has a different small business goal. It all has to add up to 23%. For us this year, it's 15.75%, recognizing that there really aren't any small businesses that build rockets and spacecraft. There used to be SpaceX was small for us until about 2013, and then they exceeded 1,500 employees, so we can't count them anymore. That was a hit to our metrics. But anyway, we've been around 15.75, 16% for a small business goal for several years. Small disadvantaged business goal was 5% every year until now. Government-wise, been made 11%. Ours got set at 8.2. Women-owned is 5%. That's been steady every year. Service disabled and hub zone are 3%. And the goals are the same for the subcontracting level, except for the overall small business goal, which for us is 35.5% this year. So those, and then I go about negotiating goals with each of our field offices, which would take like 2 days to discuss. But anyway, so those are our goals. We usually meet the overall small business goal every year, or at least the last 4 years or so. We have always met the small disadvantaged business goal at 5%. The 8.2 remains to be seen. We're about 7.8 right now, but it's early in the year. We've come in the 4s on women-owned. We've not made the 5%. And the hub zone and service disabled we struggle with, so we're in the 1s for those. Now subcontracting is different. We make the goals in subcontracting pretty consistently in almost all the categories. So
why is it a struggle within hub zone?
Hub zone's the only category the government has never made the goal in. Tough category in that there's a lot of paperwork involved, because you got to have like I think it's 35% residency requirement, and you got to document that. And if you have 5 people in your company, 3 of them live in your hub zone, and then 1 of them moves out all of a sudden, or 2 of them move out all of a sudden, you're not technically not a hub zone anymore. So and I'm finding that the strongest industry for hub zone, from what I see, tends to be construction. We don't see a lot of hub zone participation in our R&D stuff, and since that's our biggest NAICS code, I think that's a big part of the story. Can we do better in hub zone? Yeah, a little bit. Do I see us getting to 3%? I would say probably not in the current environment. Right. So.
Okay, there we go. I have one final question, and I think we have one question on the YouTube chat. Okay. And this is regarding, if you can, would you mind sharing some piece of advice for small businesses who are looking to do business with NASA, especially for those businesses that are service disabled and hub zone, because that's a part of the goal, but all around just underrepresented businesses in this space? Okay. What are some recommendations you may give for them?
Okay, so this is a collection of observations that I've sort of amassed over time. And the first thought that came to mind is a lot of businesses will come to us, and the first thing they tell us is what their socioeconomic category is. They say, I'm an 8A or a woman-owned. The first thing we want to know is what your line of business is, what your industry is. Okay. I've seen some events where we'll do it on a WebEx, and there's the Q&A. They post the Q&A, and we'll get businesses, or even in person. We'll get businesses that like they have a coffee shop, and things like that. And you're women-owned, but it's not something that we can really use. So that's when you approach us, please tell us what your line of business, because what we tell you, how we counsel you, is entirely dependent upon what your line of business is. Okay, and what direction. Like my job is really kind of steer you in the right direction, and so that is entirely dependent on what your industry is. Second thing is this: how to contact us. And this is sort of an email versus calling question. All right. Not an easy answer to that. And it depends on the individual whom you're trying to reach, because everybody has their different preferences. Now, when I get an email, I open it up, and all the pictures in the email, any graphics are taken out, and I have to make a click on a button to bring up the pictures. Okay. Now, the volume of email continues to increase. And we have a firewall, and a lot of times emails will not make it through the firewall, and they get junked without us ever seeing it. Okay. And then our security office and our CI office are not real keen on us opening emails from people who we don't know who they are, especially attachments from those people. All right. So when you add all that up, I'm a big proponent of calling rather than email because you get a dialogue going. If you want to follow it up with an email, fine. But I'm much, but part of me is just that, we'd rather talk than type, I guess. But I'm a big advocate of calling rather than emailing. If we get an email and it just looks like a mass mailing, we're going to treat it pretty much the same way as you get mass mailings at home. Okay. All right. Now, if it's individually addressed to us, you will get a response, but it's more often than not, it's going to be a canned response. It's going to say, here's the website, here's our centers, that sort of thing. And that's just due to the volume that we get. Yeah. So, and if you email us in headquarters, we're mostly going to refer you to our centers because, again, that's where the contracting decisions are made, the set aside decisions and all of that kind of stuff. So we are in headquarters where I am. We do not get involved with most of the contracting decisions. They just don't come through us, except for some of the very large contracts.
And how many centers are there, Richard?
That's a good question. It depends on what you call a center. Okay. Traditionally, it was called 10. And but then we've added a couple of buying offices. NASA Shared Services Center, which is running the human resources RFP. They're not a center per se. They're a contracting office basically that sits at Stennis, and there's a separate buying office. Depends on whether you call the Jet Propulsion Lab a center or not. It's a federally funded research development center. And then we just created, the Office of Procurement created an IT procurement office where most of the IT requirements are going to come out of going forward. And they don't really have a location at all. They're technically in Greenbelt, Maryland, but there one or two people may have an office there and everybody else is working remotely. So so it depends what you count as a center, but I'm going to go with number 10 closely, more or less. So continuing with this question, I already mentioned that we're decentralized, so it's a matter of finding what office buys your product or your service. And then we talked about how long it takes to get your foot in the door and building relationships, which is hard to do in the virtual environment. 3 to 4 year process of researching, finding out what contracts match up with your line of business, when those contracts expire, when they get recompeted, who the incumbent is, whether they were set aside or not, all of that. My other theme is that more dollars went to small businesses at the subcontracting level than at the prime level. It's almost a 50-50 split, but it's a little more at subcontracting. That's how you get your foot in the door. It's not easy to break in cold turkey at the prime level, particularly if you don't have any NASA experience. We try to straddle or achieve a balance in our messaging where we don't want to discourage people, but we also want to be, realistic. So an example, like we have this business, a women-owned small business called Logical Innovations, and we have awards programs for our small businesses, and they won Small Business of the Year a few years back. And she started by working for a NASA prime contractor as an employee, quit, started her own business, went back to that prime contractor as a subcontractor, and then got prime contracts based on that. So it was a gradual process, but that's a typical story. Again, the IT industry is it's a very large ocean. And so it is kind of hard to break in, probably get your foot in the door cold turkey without some connection like that. But we do strongly encourage looking at the subcontracting venue first. Now, if your company is what I'd call truly small, let's say 10, 20 employees, something like that, you're almost better off looking for the contracts that are full and open and have a large prime, because those are the ones that have the subcontracting goals. Whereas the small businesses don't. They might sub out, but they might sub out some of their work to a large, So if you're just starting out with an agency or with the government, depending on your industry, you're almost better off looking for the contracts that are held by large primes. Or, like they usually have their subcontracting teams in place, but for the recompetes, that's one piece of advice that you might not hear too often, but something to keep in mind. So I think I ran my mouth on that question enough there. I think that's all I've got on that for the time being. So,
No, definitely a nice list. We usually have someone to give us like one or two, but when you said I have collected a list over the years, I said,
Yeah,
goodness.
I was going to have a hard time with just giving one. Sorry.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for that. Chrisley?
Yeah, so I would say, Richard, thank you for joining us. I mean, you've given us an abundance of information. I mean, you understand our objectives in getting this information to underrepresented communities. And I think what's awesome is that most of our guests, that like government agencies, we've had, United States Department of Transportation, we've had the port here. I think what's amazing is that, and the resounding sound we keep hearing is, you all are making great efforts in making sure that there's a space for underrepresented communities. And I think it's definitely shows by you guys joining our podcast. The Government Coins is a podcast we created for minority-owned women businesses that, essentially want to break into the government contracting space. And a lot of the things that you talked about are some of the tips that, Hamza teaches about, with Global Connects. Shakia, she teaches about when it comes down to GovLEA and doing the supplier diversity, and what we teach at with Black Bunker. So this was an amazing conversation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so insightful. And for engaging with our audience. I will let Shakia and Hamza kind of sign out. Well, actually, Richard, are you open to our audience and everyone please, be sparing. Let's not clog up Richard's inbox, right? Plus the firewall.
We have a small business inbox for that.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll paste that in, and then Brianna or whoever goes in there can divvy it up among, me or my counterpart. So just give me a second here.
Perfect. So that's wonderful. Oh, Brianna, they put it in there, but yeah.
Oh, she did? Okay, thank you, Brianna.
Yeah, she did.
Okay, that's it.
So
and the phone number, and again, I said call, so, because as opposed to email, so I'm going to put in our office phone number. And again, we're headquarters, so expect an answer along the lines of contact this center or that center, depending on what your industry is. Okay, so, and then again, it's that's the government bureaucracy, but it's going to be a phone tree or an email tree. So, but that that's this. You can start with this that we posted. So,
awesome, thank you. And you know what, everyone that is watching, very rarely do government agencies put in their phone number and email addresses for you to contact them. But here at Government Coins, we have NASA that has openly provided you guys with an email and a phone number. But prior to doing that, let's make sure we're doing the adequate research. Make sure you're taking a look at their procurement forecast. You're taking a look at their programs. You're taking a look at, the top 50, primes that have been awarded. So you have a clear and defined conversation. You are not just saying, hey, I sell hair. That, they might not be able to take that to Mars, right? So we have to be intentional.
Right.
Right. But I'm Chrisley. Thank you again for coming on, Richard. I am one of the co-hosts of Government Coins. Shakia?
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this, so appreciate it.
Good. We'll definitely have you back then, Richard, as things progress and just to hear more about the programs as well. So thank you again. And I'm Shakia. It was such a pleasure meeting you.
Yes, thank you, Richard, for joining our podcast. And I am Hamza Sabri, founder and CEO of Global Connects and one of the co-hosts for Government Coins.
Everybody out there in the YouTube world, if you are listening to this on Amazon or iTunes or Spotify as of right now, make sure you are sharing this podcast with the people that you know who are looking to scale and grow their business. If you're on YouTube, do not forget to like, share, and comment. Ask those questions. Check out the links that we put in the chat. Richard gave us so many links, and then y'all know I'm always researching and dropping the links in the chat as well. Check out the links to the procurement forecast. Before you reach out, just like Chrissy said, make sure you're ready. Look at FPDS to see what type of contracts are being awarded. Again, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see y'all in the next